broadcasting from the epicenter of Silicon Valley. Welcome back to the Tech Twins. I'm Mark.
And I'm Andrew. We're excited to be back at Stanford for spring quarter 2025. This is our last quarter before graduation with our MBAs this summer. Today, we're going to be covering a variety of topics, starting with a deep dive into artificial intelligence based on notes from various sessions with industry experts in the winter 2025 quarter at Stanford University.
We will also be touching on the fact that it's April, which is Armenian History Month in Los Angeles, where we grew up, and for the Armenian diaspora, and what we know so far about the Startup Garage course that we're in this quarter. So just to recap, this episode will be focused first on a deep dive on artificial intelligence, structured in 10 core insights. We'll be talking about Armenian History Month and Stanford Startup Garage. Let's dive in. So first insight, let's start with AI, defining AI. Generative AI refers to artificial intelligence systems, typically powered by neural networks such as transformers. This is the key underlying innovation that enabled generative AI, and it was invented by researchers at Google Brain in the 2017 paper, Attention is All You Need. These are designed to generate new data, often in the form of text, images, audio, or code. These models work by predicting and generating the next element in a sequence, or by filling in missing parts of an input. Unlike traditional discriminative AI, which focuses on classification or regression tasks based on existing labeled data, generative AI is centered on creation, projecting new content that resembles the data that it was trained on. So we can go through three core elements about generative AI now that we generally know what it means. The first is the technical foundation. The second is the historical context, because this has been a field that has had research for decades actually, and also the social and economic impact. So Andrew, I'd love if you could start by talking about the technical foundation.
So generative AI uses neural networks to predict and generate new data in a sequence or to fill in a gap in an existing sequence. Uses projection as opposed to classification. A large language model is trained on enormous collections of text scraped from the internet, then used to train a special kind of neural network called a transformer. The transformer compresses into a compact neural network. It represents the meaning of the words via embeddings. An embedding is an ordered list of thousands of numbers. A transformer selects these numbers automatically. A transformer can use embeddings to understand similarities or differences between words. With this information, a transformer can construct a web that captures relationship between these words. Transformers then predict the best next word.
That's really interesting because before knowing this, you might think that when you're chatting with a generative AI system, that it's thinking about what it's going to say in response to your question that you have prompted it in a way similar to a human, and that's definitely how it comes off to the user, but it's actually a prediction-based mechanism that it doesn't at this moment understand why it is saying what it is saying. It is using these methods that Andrew mentioned. And maybe we can just get a quick recap because that was pretty technical about what do you think is important to know from that section?
I think that the prediction aspect is important to know, and then it's interesting how the transformer is selecting from a list of thousands of numbers, and ultimately I think the whole goal of our podcast is to make it really digestible, and so I think what's interesting is that's why it's problematic to talk to a generative AI tool, because it's not actually responding to us. It's predicting based on what it thinks we want to hear.
And also, from what we've anecdotally heard, it tends to be more positive than the truth. So there's some sort of way that it has been programmed, which none of us know other than the people that have programmed these tools, that it's kind of responding in a way that's affirming whatever the user is asking. So you can say oh, what do you think about this section of text that I put in, like a potential LinkedIn post, for example? It tends to say that it's good and not have as much criticism. So that's something that at least I've noticed from the many different people that use these AI tools at Stanford. Okay, so I'll touch a little bit on the historical context. Generative AI, as I mentioned, this is just the latest chapter in AI's development history, building upon earlier work. Artificial intelligence has its roots in the Dartmouth Research Center's for Dartmouth Research Conference's proposal for the Dartmouth Summer Research Projects on AI, and it connects to Frank Rosenblatt's perceptron, one of the earliest neural network models. It follows paradigm shifts in scientific understanding, as described by Thomas Kuhn in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions.
I'd love to touch on the social and economic impact. Generative AI is automating creative work in unprecedented ways. Commercial art sectors are being revolutionized, similar to how photography transformed portrait painting. New job categories are emerging, such as prompt engineers and AI ethicists, and personal services and person-to-person communication roles remain difficult to automate. So like previous waves of automation, generative AI is likely to transform labor markets rather than simply eliminate jobs, and historical patterns suggest we'll see different types of work rather than less work overall, with businesses needing to increase worker productivity from 1.6 to 2.5% to maintain national economic growth.
Yeah, and according to experts, there's this new section of AI, though what we've heard is that it's not here yet, called agents, and agents are AI systems that can take action on your behalf, not directly related to what you have asked. So apparently we will see AI agents running reinforcement learning and AI systems functioning as computer programmers and mathematicians within the next 5 to 7 years, which is something that wasn't as well predicted before these recent developments such as ChatGPT. And a blog post by Leopold Aschenbrenner suggests that these advances could occur even faster due to compounding effects, and this is generally known as AGI, or artificial generative intelligence, and that is the hypothetical intelligence of a machine that actually possesses the ability to understand or learn any intellectual task that a human being can. And as I mentioned, we're not there yet, but that's what the AI industry is building towards. And when you hear about billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars going into companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral AI, they are all building towards this AGI future. And if you think that these AI systems are powerful now, that is going to be much more powerful than what we currently have, which, as we mentioned, is largely prediction-based.
So there's significant hype within the AI community, which indicates the potential about the trajectory of the technology. So it's one to watch, and we'll continue to comment on it.
Yeah, and now that we have an understanding of what AI is, we feel comfortable talking about 9 other insights that we think you should know as our listeners. Insight number 2 is understanding the scale of AI training. We have notes from the winter 2025 quarter at Stanford University that detail the massive scale of training large language models.
So pre-training involves masking words and then predicting them. It's conceptually simple, but computationally intensive.
And once training begins, it takes up to 6 months with computers running 24 hours a day to create a model.
The largest models are trained on 100 to 200,000 GPUs, which are the graphical chips.
And each GPU costs $30,000 approximately, with a bundled cost of $50,000 depreciated over 3 years.
Currently, training costs about $250 million.
Yeah, so this key insight about understanding the scale of AI training is about how these models are trained before there is a consumer that is using them. So we all engaged with ChatGPT in 2022, but all of this was being done previously to train these models, and especially as there seems to be this proven usefulness of generative AI models, there are other models that are being trained for more specific things. This gives you a sense of what that takes in terms of a cost and technology and timeline. So it's not the most rapid process. The third insight is large context windows are transforming capabilities. We want to highlight this as a key advancement within the field of generative AI.
Context windows represent the number of tokens a model can process.
For example, Gemini, which is the Google model, can handle up to 2 million tokens, with each token representing 3 to 4 characters.
And so for us as a user, that's the actual chat interface that we interface with. And this means that in a single question that we ask the AI, the model can process 20 books worth of text.
These large context windows function as a form of short-term memory for the artificial intelligence. And you can think of this as when you're having a conversation with the AI tool, the fact that it has the ability to remember what you asked previously in the conversation and also reference what it looked up on the internet or in its knowledge previously, that is all within the realm of context windows. And so having larger context windows allows for a more in-depth, robust retrieval function, and that is based on my understanding why we're seeing innovations like deep research with OpenAI or similar offerings from Anthropic that enable you to have really long question asking times, and the fact that it remembers what it's reading and is able to synthesize that into a long report.
Okay, so the fourth insight is that AI agents are hyped to transform workflows. AI agents are systems that can take action for users, but from everything we've heard, they're mainly hype at this point. Some examples include identifying areas for housing, checking availability, and choosing options based on land use regulations.
Yes, so for example, these agents could take an individual who wants to build their own house. It could work with the designer to prototype a building, work with the local government to ensure that this design is complying with local regulations, all based on this initial prompt or conversation that indicates what that person wants to do. And as you can imagine, this is much more useful than one person going back and forth with individual questions every time.
So the notes suggest that we'll see an infinite number of agents forming complete workflows.
And a critical question that was raised is what happens when the agent can rewrite itself and improve itself. That's something that we don't know the answer to, but something we want to raise as a question to think about.
And some startups are already working on producing new agents from existing ones, which would be the beginning of what we were just talking about.
To do this requires underlying systems becoming smart enough to have contextual understanding, and from what we've heard, true agentic architecture will require reasoning models underlying them. As we reach higher performance levels of these models, we can expect to see more agents in the world, which will most likely be applied to workflows, which relates to the previous point that we mentioned about the labor market, that this would impact the way jobs are done. And one thing to think about is as AI agents get more capable, then they will be able to do more of what a traditional information worker can do. So in the example that we mentioned with the house, this is not something that is computer done right now. It is something that there's an architect, there is somebody looking at regulations, but these are things that could be automated in the future, which is kind of scary actually. Insight number 5, scaling inference and reasoning models. We touched on reasoning models slightly earlier. Scaling inference is also something you need to know if you want to understand generative AI. Something surprising started happening in pre-training towards the end of last year, which is 2024. And if you recall, pre-training is what we mentioned is happening before the model is ready to go towards the consumer.
Yeah, there was concern that models were running out of data to train on with pre-training slowing down.
And the reasons for this that were believed were complicated, including data limits and how the data is used.
The key development, however, is scaling inference, similar to how humans spend more time thinking when facing hard tasks.
And we imagine that you've already engaged with these tools because these reasoning models have been released. People were training models to think more at the inference time before responding to the user.
So chain of thought reasoning, which is breaking down a problem into a series of pieces, is taught through reinforcement learning.
And for OpenAI's model, we don't know exactly how it was trained, but we believe that reinforcement learning was used internally with the language model to develop the O1 reasoning model.
Yeah, and this approach is compared to playing a game where reinforcement learning has worked well.
An example that was brought up is AlphaGo, which uses human supervision, and AlphaZero, which uses synthetic data and self-play to reach superhuman levels. And just recapping this section, reasoning models are a new innovation that has come up. It's unclear what they're actually doing under the hood, but it's unlikely that they're actually reasoning because we haven't reached this AGI moment, thankfully, honestly. But scaling inference is something that is key to the possibility that there could be something like a reasoning model out there. So that's how they're spending more time thinking on the hard problems.
Very interesting. And there's probably a cost benefit of doing this as well, because we talked about how expensive the pre-training was at the beginning.
The sixth insight we want to cover is shifting from pre-training to test time performance. So pre-training, it used to be the focus within AI, but people have moved away from focusing solely on pre-training.
So instead, they're focusing on getting models to work well at test time by breaking problems into steps.
And if you recall from the previous insight, this is related to chain of thought reasoning. This typically combines chain of thought reasoning with reinforcement learning and an internal model of the universe.
And there's a blog post that OpenAI published when they launched O1 that likely covers this approach.
And interestingly, high-level superintelligence, there are debates on if that is actually expected to happen, and it is not expected to happen.
Okay, the next insight is there's global competition in the space and global breakthroughs.
So there are 4 significant recent developments when we think of the competition and breakthroughs.
Okay, let me talk about each of the 4 of them at a high level. I'll name them, and then Mark, you can talk about what they are. Google's Notebook LM, Google's View 2, OpenAI's O3, and DeepSeek's R1v3.
Yes, so there's Google Notebook LM, which is not human. That is kind of the thing that's related to that. This likely refers to its ability to summarize and reason over large documents with precision. There's also Google's View 2. This creates high-quality short movies, where Google is pushing creative boundaries by automating short film creation. And OpenAI O3, this is a reasoning model, and it is scoring at high standards for graduate levels. This is a benchmark that the tool is not just being assistive, but it can perform at higher level knowledge tasks. And then DeepSeek, the model is called R1v3. It is the first example of Chinese innovation that was majorly talked about within US circles. And I'm sure that you've heard about this one as well. It was all over the Wall Street Journal. This marks a geopolitical shift in AI leadership, and it could accelerate global competition and make the AI race more multipolar. And for those who underestimate innovation from China, this would have been a surprise to them.
Yeah, I think there's talented people everywhere. So globally, also Europe and France and places, there's lots of innovation happening. And so it's unclear how it's going to develop over time.
But key to pay attention, and kudos to everybody that's making breakthroughs in this space. Comment what you think about that, and if you have a specific company that you're watching, would love to know about that. Next, in terms of what is a trend that could define the next part of generative AI's future, insight number 8 is that large language models plus reinforcement learning will likely define the next 5 years of progress in this field, because gains in reinforcement learning are happening quickly enough to be applied in many different areas.
Yeah, so the combination of large language models and reinforcement learning is described as the narrative for the next 5 years.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, this combination will impact the labor market. Some people believe that humans will generally be twice as productive in 5 years based on having access to these tools, which is pretty interesting and has implications that are both positive and negative. And I actually wonder what this means for all types of roles. Please put your comments below and share your thoughts. I'm thinking of 3 specific types of roles that could be impacted: knowledge workers, operations and decision making, and creatives. How do you think that this narrative will impact those 3 roles, Andrew?
So you said knowledge, operations and creative.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're all going to be impacted. I think, of course, the more creative, the more original, and so
Less likely potentially to be
maybe
automated.
less likely to be automated, but at the same time, like creativity probably comes from, yeah, like exposure, and so then if a model it has a lot of exposure, then it's probably going to seem creative too.
Yeah, I think the main thing that is relatively obvious is that the more repetitive a task is, those are the ones that are likely to be easily mimicked by an AI tool. But high leverage thinking and judgment tasks, those can be the differentiators. And so if you're working in a job today and thinking about how is AI going to impact you, if you become more of an expert at the tasks that are less repetitive, that's likely good for your job prospects.
But I think everyone should learn about AI if they can, because it's like going to impact everyone. So even if it's not going to impact someone's job today, it's likely going to be impacting their company in some way, and so probably could help them be more central. Yeah.
Oh, what does that mean? Because a lot of the insights that we shared are related to how AI is trained and made, but that's not actually impacting most people. They're using the tool that is.
Yeah.
So what should they learn about?
Well, maybe when they're using the tool, they try to learn how does it work, so that they're using it. They need to learn how to use it at the same time, probably to understand, like what can it do and what can't it do, and that's probably a great starting point.
Great. Another thing, which is our ninth insight, is that there is a divide between the infrastructure and application layer of artificial intelligence. Infrastructure is related to many of the insights we shared earlier about how the models are trained. This includes 4 components: compute, storage, networking, and models. So they're stacked, and models are the ones that we are engaging with. The investments of the past few years have mainly been in the infrastructure layer, but there have been some investments in the application layer as well, and those are accelerating. The internship that I had last summer at Trunk Tools AI for Construction was an application layer AI company.
Yeah, so on the application side, this is an opportunity for product thinkers focused on consumer product experiences. And stay tuned for what we're working on in this space. But there's so many opportunities in the application of AI to many different industries.
Exactly. So when we think about what people need to know, you don't necessarily need to know too much about the infrastructure of AI, what chips are being used, how the short-term memory, long-term memory is being used, how this model is different from that model at a technical level under the hood. Because right now, being timely in 2025, there is a lot of work, that early work that's happening in how these AI models are being applied to a variety of different fields.
Yeah.
And there's not as much work happening on the infrastructure layer.
It was also mentioned that evaluations of the models was like a hot area to watch. It's also called evals, how to measure model performance in real world use cases. Likely there's going to be some startups that are in that space that come up. That was mentioned in class.
So what does that mean for, could you just break that down a little bit further?
It was saying that, the class was saying that there needs to be a way to evaluate how the model is performing. So if there's not really a good benchmark, then there's no way to know which model is better than the other. And then how would, let's say, a business decide which model to invest in? And so I'm not sure if that's going to be like a research lab at Stanford that creates an evaluation framework. I know there is one. I think it's Percy Liang's lab that is doing some work in this space, or if a startup will come up with a innovative way. All I heard in class was that evaluation of models is important, going to become more important, and there's probably going to be something happening in that space.
Specifically for the application layer, because you want to understand as a business that is applying AI, how good is that tool that you're using? Let's say it's answering questions via a chatbot for customer support. How can you make that better? And what are the benchmarks, evaluations, or the way that those are done? So that's something to watch, as Andrew mentioned. And then the 10th insight that we wanted to leave you with related to artificial intelligence is related to investment trends, because as we've seen, being in Silicon Valley, investments tend to drive the work that many smart people do. And good advice is to follow the money for investment trends.
So in class, the highlighted areas were code generation, customer support, and productivity tools as a place to start, since they are text-heavy tasks that seem like the off-the-shelf language models would be able to immediately add value to. And so, however, these all seem to be, no, I wouldn't say saturated, but there's people that are working in each of these fields. So I wouldn't necessarily give any of our listeners the advice to like immediately enter any of these fields, but these are areas that I think investors are investing in. However, the area of interest that we've been focused on, which is robotics, is also getting increased investment in recent months as well. So I think that there's probably lots of areas of investment.
I think it's also like a timeline. So because the foundation models that were popularized with ChatGPT were large language models, which hopefully you picked up from our podcast, that is not the core innovation. That is an application of the transformer innovation to language, that was focused on text. So then the first invested companies included companies like Harvey that were using AI to help lawyers manage their law documents, a startup called Cursor, which does code generation, and it's much better than the first one I think was like GitHub Copilot that Microsoft released. And then now there's this dedicated company, not inside of a big tech, that's called Cursor, doing code generation. Companies related to customer support, such as Intercom, were integrating AI into their existing tools because it was just very clear how the AI that was trained on text could apply to those fields. And that was the first wave, but there are other things where these other areas that these foundation models are being applied to, and there's still room to figure out for whatever area that you're interested in. Is there a way that the foundation model can be applied and make it better? And what is that? Because the core innovation happened in 2017, as I mentioned.
Well, this has been a comprehensive set of insights on where AI stands today.
One other thing I wanted to mention before we wrap this section on artificial intelligence is that fine-tuning models is another area that's gaining traction for applying AI models to certain areas. So one that we heard about in class was fine-tuning models to help product managers. There's a lot of things as former product managers that we know are done that result from core work. And so if there could be a model that helps the product manager do that, it could accelerate product development. For example, an output could be a product specification with implicit reward functions.
Cool.
Yeah, and while the future of AI is unclear, it seems like there's a lot of investments and application areas that are receiving funding, and that most likely this field will continue similar to previous tech waves such as cloud, the internet, and many other very significant tool developments that have impacted how many of us live our lives.
So these 10 insights provide a comprehensive insider view of current AI development trends.
Do we want to just recap all 10?
Sure. I can do that. The first was we defined AI. Then we talked about the scale of AI training. We said large context windows are transforming capabilities. Then AI agents are hyped to transform workflows. Scaling inference and reasoning models potentially. A shift from pre-training to test time performance. Global competition and breakthroughs. LLMs and reinforcement learning defining the next 5 years. The infrastructure versus application divide, and investment trends.
Thank you. And the combination of large language models with reinforcement learning does seem to be the central narrative as we look forward on how this field will develop. And the experts, as we mentioned, predict that within the next 5 years there will be dramatic productivity increases, as well as global competition, particularly from China, that is intensifying. And as we follow these developments, we will continue to bring you the latest insights on the tech twins.
That's been fun.
Great. So April is Armenian History Month. This is another section of our podcast that we wanted to talk about because we're half Armenian. We grew up in Los Angeles, and April is commemorated as Armenian History Month there. I just saw yesterday that the Los Angeles, I think, Board of Supervisors designated this as an official month of remembrance, as they typically do every year. And this is also typically commemorated by the Armenian diaspora around the world. As I mentioned, we're both half Armenian, and April is significant because April 24th marks the beginning of the Armenian genocide in World War I, which resulted in the death of 1.5 million Armenians. This was the worst humanitarian disaster of World War I and one of the first modern genocides. This year marks 110 years since the beginning of this tragedy, and each year, Armenian communities gather to commemorate this immense loss. All 4 of our great-grandparents on our mom's side were survivors, and the severity of the impact on the human beings targeted cannot be overstated. If you have Armenian friends, this is a nice time to reach out and mention that you are thinking of them. Currently in the Stanford MBA program, we're part of a community of 3 Armenian students, and Andrew and I will be hosting a movie screening of The Promise in a few weeks to commemorate this date at Stanford Business School. The Promise is the main feature film to be created about the Armenian genocide, and we will also be participating in a week of events at Stanford. Ever since we were in undergrad at UC Berkeley, we have been members of the Armenian Students Association, and at both UC Berkeley and Stanford, there is a tradition of hosting an Armenian Genocide Awareness Week to inform the campus communities that we are part of this history. I would just like to close this section by saying that the Armenian nation is built of creators, creatives, and survivors, and we're very proud to help amplify this message. Have you been to Armenia, or do you have Armenian friends? Let us know in the comments below.
Thanks. So we went to Armenia for the first time that anyone in our family had returned since the Armenian genocide in 2023 to teach a personal computer product management class in 2 cities, Dilijan and Yerevan, Armenia, for the month of July. And the main insight that we had is that, yes, this is a country built on tragedy, but there's also so much happiness and joy, especially in the youth. So there are many amazing things that are still to come from the country of Armenia, and you will want to be paying attention.
Yeah, happy Armenian History Month. So the final topic for today's podcast will be that we're currently enrolled in the Startup Garage class at Stanford. This is a business school hallmark, iconic startup class. DoorDash is a very large company that has emerged from this class. Application-based, we were admitted, and we're currently working on our own startup idea that we're hoping to take post-graduation within the AI and robotics space. Stay tuned, but no risk, no reward, right? So
we're gonna continue. We started this project last quarter in entrepreneurship and venture capital, and then we're also thankfully have this amazing friendship with our friend who's finishing her PhD in AI and robotics at MIT, who we've been supporting each other essentially through the academic journey as we've gone to different schools, starting from Cal to Stanford and MIT, who's also helpful in our just how we stay up to date. So we're excited to take Startup Garage to say we took it, and hopefully through the first iteration of Startup Garage talk to over 100 or 200 potential customers through the class. And it's a special version of Startup Garage, only taught for the first time in spring with 48 students total, and so we'll be 2 of them, and it actually starts tomorrow.
On Friday.
Starts on Friday, so we're excited.
Wow, I didn't know there were only 48 students in it. And if you apply to this class, you actually have to have a business school or, I'm not sure, graduate student involved. And so if you're an undergrad at Stanford, you wouldn't be able to take this class just by yourself, which is another reason that we wanted to just take advantage of that opportunity since we're graduating summer, so we'll not be able to take the classes after that.
And I mean, this is the last episode, the first episode of spring quarter, right? So I'm Also happy to announce that I'm only taking 12 units, and I'm taking a chill this quarter, and only in 3 classes as well. So we'll have the time to focus on the Startup Garage and also a couple other classes as well.
That's awesome. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. Broadcasting from the epicenter of Silicon Valley, you've been listening to the Tech Twins. Please engage with our content, comment questions, like, and give us 5 stars on Spotify for more content. And we will see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.